everyone, welcome back or welcome to my channel. My name's Lizzie and today I wanted to make a video all about my favourite sewing tools. Firstly, I would just like to say I'm really sorry if I keep going really bright and then not so bright and really bright, but I'm using natural light and the sun is kind of peeping out from clouds and going back behind clouds, so sorry about that. But anyway, I thought that it might be helpful or interesting to tell you about my favourite tools that I use for sewing all the way through from when I'm starting to kind of trace patterns, do toiles, through to the actual sewing process. So to start with, this is not really a tool I guess, but I'm kind of sneaking it in here anyway. But I do trace all my patterns. The reason that I trace my patterns is because, well, for printed patterns, when you've paid for a printed pattern, it's been delivered or you've bought it in a shop or whatever, that's like a physical, tangible item that you've purchased. And if you cut it out, if you're like a size 10 at the time or whatever, you cut it out in a size 10, or 2 years later you might have maybe gained weight, or lost weight for whatever reason that may be, or you might want to make it for a friend who's a different size for you than you are, and I just think it's such a shame to have permanently cut that paper pattern because you can't get another copy of that you've bought your one copy. You can't get another copy without buying another copy. So I always trace paper patterns. And I actually also trace my PDFs. And you guys might think that's a bit crazy, but I hate PDF sewing patterns. Well, that's not true. I really like the fact that you can get hold of them instantly and you can, you know, literally click buy and 10 minutes later you're printing it out and getting going with sticking it all together. But I really do hate the process of sticking them together. I haven't ever used one of these like net printer services, which I'm sure are fantastic, but it just adds to the cost if you're paying like, you know, a couple of pounds per sheet to get big 8-0 sheets printed. And if you do that, it removes the instantaneous benefit of PDF patterns. But anyway, if I've gone through all the effort of sticking together a bajillion pieces of paper, again, I don't want to then cut the size out because in the future I might want to make it in a different size and then I'd have to go through all the rigmarole of sticking together a bajillion sheets of A4 paper again. So I always trace and I use this tracing paper. Now this is one from Amazon. What I'm gonna do, instead of linking everything in the description box, I might do one of those like Amazon storefronts because most of this stuff can be bought on Amazon. Of course you could choose to find something similar, an independent shop if you prefer, if you're in the market to buy some of these things. But it might be easier for me to just put one link below, and anyway, the links will be below in some format. But I use this tracing paper. I buy it from Amazon. As you can see, it's really wide. Let's see if I can get, yeah, it's really nice and wide, so it's perfect for tracing big pattern pieces. And let me see if I can get a bit out to show you actually. So it's a bit like baking paper, to be honest, but I like it because it's quite sturdy, so it's not easy to tear. You're not going to accidentally be tearing it apart. It's nice and transparent, and I just think it's a really good weight. Sturdy but nice and see-through, which I think is exactly what you want with tracing paper. For me, after tracing comes toiling, and that's particularly true for woven garments. And I've only really got into making toiles in the last year since I made my wedding dress, but it means that, and again, this isn't really a tool, is it? But I'll sneak it in there. I bought, when I was making my wedding dress, a roll of a 10-metre bolt of Calico for £30 from Simple Sew, and it just means that I've got in my cupboard, you know, a stash of Calico, and any woven garment that I'm making that I haven't made before and I want to make a toile to check the fit, to see if I need to make any adjustments to my pattern pieces, I can do it ahead of time with this. And I just think it makes sense to just have a stash of this at home if you have space to do so, if you're going to be making toiles for, you know, quite a few garments. I think it's easier to just have like a 10-metre bolt than buying lots of short lengths at a time. Another tool that is relevant to the whole kind of preparation part of sewing, so the tracing, the, you know, making a toile, pattern adjustments, all that kind of thing, is one of these. Now, I don't really know what this is called. I think this is called a pattern master. I think it is different to a French curve. Sorry, you can't really see it very well, can you? Because it's like transparent. But basically, it's a flat ruler along this edge. It's flat along this edge, so you've got a nice right angle you can work with. And it's got obviously several curves here and here that can be useful for, you know, if you're maybe grading in or out a pattern piece and you need like a nice smooth curve to work with. And it's got measurements all around the edges, which is really useful. But I actually use this a lot because of, it's got these grid lines on it. I hope you can see that. I'm sorry that it's not particularly clear. But it's just really, really useful when you're tracing things, making pattern adjustments to get sort of straight lines and parallel lines. Because you could hold the top here up to the edge of your fabric, and let's say you want to cut, oh yeah, so that's a good example. I use it if I'm cutting like strips of fabric to make like a strap or something, and if I want to cut like a 5 centimeter strip of fabric, I can hold this, I can line up the edge of the fabric with the 5 centimeter line, and then I can cut along the edge here with my rotary cutter. So I just find one of these really useful. I actually got this quite early on in my sewing journey, and I'm really glad I did, because it's just really useful. And I think the more advanced you get into your sewing journey, I don't consider myself particularly super advanced or anything, but I've definitely learned a lot since I started dressmaking 3.5 years ago. But this I found helpful sort of all the way through, really, and I've used it more and more as I've like developed my skills. Related to that is cutting. Now, I moved on quite a while ago to rotary cutters. I no longer cut out with scissors. I just never ever do. Don't get me wrong, if you've got a nice sturdy fabric and you can just use a few pins to pin your pattern piece on, then scissors can be great to cut out. But I now always use a big old cutting mat. I'm pretty sure this is the biggest size you can get. It is, does it tell me what size it is? It's A1 size, and it's got metric, it's got like grid, like a metric grid on one side and an imperial one on the other side. And I have 2 of these. I have this blue one and I have a pink one, and it means that I can lay them side by side, like end on end, when I've got really long pattern pieces I'm trying to cut out. And you do need a cutting mat if you're going to be using a rotary cutter, because it will protect your table or your floor or wherever it is that you cut out your pattern pieces. And yeah, a rotary cutter, you just slide the blade back and you use it like a pizza slicer to cut out your fabric, and I just find it so much easier and quicker than scissors. So this is what I used to cut out with. Really glad I've got it. I've never looked back. I've also got like a sharpener for it to sharpen the blades, so I don't have to replace the blades quite so often, so that's really useful too. And on that note, with cutting out using a rotary cutter, I need to get a slightly more glamorous way to store them, but these are my pattern weights. Now these, in my opinion, are the best pattern weights. Are they particularly pretty? Are they particularly beautiful? No, and you can get some gorgeous pattern weights from various different, you know, indie designers and all sorts of places. But I just think big ones that stand up off your fabric are not particularly practical. I like these. Now, what these are, they're actually literally just giant washers that you would, I don't know what you'd use them for, in like plumbing, metalwork, no idea. But I'll link them below, and you can get different thicknesses of them, but as you can see, the ones I have are not like particularly thick. And they just make the best pattern weights. I have a whole pile of them. I bought them on Amazon. They're very inexpensive, and I just like that they're flat because it just makes them a bit easier to deal with. Like sometimes, and it's probably a bit naughty, but sometimes I'll even have my weights holding my piece of fabric down, and I'll actually lay my ruler on top of them if I need to use my ruler to cut something. I just find them really, really good, and they're nice and heavy, inexpensive, easy to store. I might even make some kind of little stand I can stand them on like that. They're just great. I would just highly recommend them. So now I guess we get on to the actual sewing part. And there are several things that I have found have really helped me when it comes to the actual sewing part. The first of which I'll talk about is my Tailors hams. So I actually now have 2 of these. I have your traditional Tailors ham, and then I have a sleeve roll. And I started out with this. This was the first one that I added to my collection probably a year into my dressmaking journey, and it is so helpful. I now couldn't live without it because it's just so helpful for pressing your seams, particularly if you've got a curved seam. It's just really helpful to have something to lift your fabric off of your ironing board so that any excess fabric can be sort of fall out the way, and it leaves you like a clear surface to press your slightly more tricky seams, curved seams, that kind of thing. Love this, could not live without it, now I have it. And then sort of probably another year in, I added the sleeve roll to my collection, and it is just makes it so much easier to press sleeves because it means that the bit you're pressing is lifted away from the rest of the fabric, so when you press the seam on your sleeve you're not creating creases in the rest of the sleeve, if that makes sense. Just a really good one to add, and these are such good things to like put on your, you know, if friends want to know what you want for your birthday or for Christmas. They're just really easy things for other people to buy for you, which is actually what I think happened for me with both of these things. I think my various family members bought me both of these for birthdays and Christmases and things. Next, oh guys, this is the absolute game changer. I cannot believe it took me so long to figure out that I needed one of these in my life. Now, this again was something I bought because I was making my wedding dress, and I was just really trying to figure out what I could do to equip myself to do the best job I could. And I bought myself one of these. Now this is a walking foot, and it looks like some kind of scary crocodile, but trust me, this is the best money I've ever spent on a sewing item. You can get some really fancy sewing machines that do this for you, but a walking foot is for making sure that both pieces of fabric that you're sewing together are pulled through your machine at the same pace. Unless you have one of these super fancy sewing machines that has like an integrated walking foot, you'll notice that you've got your feed dogs at the bottom of your sewing machine that lift up and pull the fabric through, but there's nothing that pulls the fabric through from the top on a traditional sewing machine. But this thing has these little, oh, this is going to be hard to show you, these little bits here that press down on your fabric from the top. So it means that your fabric's being grabbed from the top and the bottom and pulling it all through at once. I didn't know I needed this really until I actually started using it and realised that it is a game changer. I used to always be sewing and I'd get like to the end of my seam and realise that I had more fabric on the top left over still to sew than at the bottom, and it would just cause, it would mean that it would just cause real inaccuracies with my sewing. It would mean that it would all get a little bit skewed when I was sewing. But this makes it's just a dream to sew with, and I don't even use this exclusively for tricky fabrics, or fabrics that are more likely to be slippery and move about. I use it for literally everything. Everything. I've only taken it off my machine to show you. Like, that's the only reason I've taken it off. It doesn't come off my machine. When you're buying one, I would just be careful. Well, don't be careful, but do your research. Maybe get your sewing machine manual out and work out exactly what you need, because I did have to grill a lady in John Lewis to make sure that I bought the right one, because I was very confused. Because basically, you need to know what kind of model your sewing machine is, and it turns out that mine, this is the packet that mine came in, and it's an even feed foot with quilting guide for oscillating hook models, brackets, 5mm maximum width. Now, I have no idea what an oscillating hook model means, but luckily the lady in John Lewis sells my sewing machine. It's a Janome sewing machine, so I was like, look, I've got that machine, which one do I need? And she said I needed this oscillating hook one. But make sure you buy like the right one, like contact the company you're buying it from and ask them and make sure. But this is just a game changer. Like slippery jerseys, like just any fabric that is, it's just brilliant. It's just brilliant. It just means that your fabric just beautifully goes through without you having to worry about it. Game changer. Whoops, just dropped it. The next thing that I'd like to tell you about is another game changer, but this one, it's a sneaky little one. I did not expect this to be so unbelievably useful. This was bought for me, it's a sewing gauge, and it looks like this. So it's got like a measurements along the edges, and it's got this slider in the middle that moves back and forth, and it's got like a point at the end. Hang on, I hope that's focused for you. No, it doesn't look. There we go. Yeah, it's got a little hole in the end there where you can put something to sort of twist around, and it's got this here. To be honest, I don't even really know what this does, but I will find out one day. But this is so useful. I use it mostly for hemming, and I used to be a really lazy hemmer because the whole thing of like having your, I would always sort of press the hem before then going away to sew it, and it would always tell you in the pattern, you know, fold it over by X centimetres, press it, fold it over again by another X centimetres. And I'm like, well, I've got my, you know, my tape measure, I'm trying to hold it on my ironing board to measure, I'm trying to use my iron, and I'm burning my fingers with the steam whilst I'm, you know, trying to hold my tape measure on to make sure I fold it over the right amount. Oh, guys, this is just the best thing, because what you can do is you can use the little slider to, so let's say you're doing like a, I don't know, you're folding over a 2 centimetre width hem. You can put the little orange bit at the 2 centimetre mark, and then you know that when you're folding over your fabric, the folded over piece needs to be the width between here and here. And it's just so good because you can just hold it on, make sure it's folded. You know, it just makes it so easy to measure that you're getting like a nice consistent width of hem. And I use it all the time now. It's just so good, so useful. So thank you ever so much to Alice, my best friend, for buying it for me, and she bought it on recommendation from her mum, who's a very talented sewist, and yeah, her mum had said that this was the most useful thing in her sewing box. So yeah, really glad I've got this. I would highly recommend Sewing Gauge. So that's it. Those are my current, like, cannot live without sewing tools. There are some things that I'm thinking of investing in the future, and it'd be really helpful to know from you guys if you've got any feedback on what your cannot live without sewing tools are. The first thing that I would really like some advice on is chalk, because I have a total, I just really do not like, you know, marking out darts, marking where buttons go, all that kind of thing, because I just don't feel like I have the ability, the tools I need to do it very accurately. So what I do have currently is I have a little set of Tailors chalks, but I just find that as soon as the edge is no longer sharp, it's just not very accurate. And then I also have a couple of these chalk pen. They're like with the little wheel, and you, like, this bit turns and puts chalk onto your fabric as you draw. But again, so I've got this pink one and I've got a white one as well, but I just don't find them to be accurate. Like, I can't get them. I want to basically get a biro and draw nice, and obviously I can't draw with a biro on my dressmaking fabric. I've seen other people use these like chalk pencils, which would presumably be great because then you could sharpen them to maintain a nice sharp point and maintain that nice accuracy. If any of you use those, are they any good? Because if they are good, I think I'm going to need to invest. And another thing I'm now thinking about buying, maybe, we'll see, is one of those button gauges that like expands and retracts so you can mark out where your buttons go. Because yesterday, guys, I'm so proud of myself, I finally learned how to do buttonholes. And I've got a bit of a bone to pick with you all, not you all, but the sewing community at large. Because my gosh, was I intimidated by buttonholes, and I was so scared to try them, and I've been putting it off literally for years. Guys, it's not that hard. I think it's one of those things that we all, like as a community, rev up in our heads to be way more of a big deal than it is. And obviously I'm sure there are times when buttonholes will go wrong and then it must be a total pain. But actually I used the instructions of my sewing machine, and I used Tilly and the Buttons tutorial on how to do buttonholes, and it was like totally straightforward. My machine is a mechanical, quite basic machine, so I have to do a 4-step buttonhole as opposed to a 1-step buttonhole, which you would probably be able to do if you've got a more fancy digital machine where you can like basically press go and it does it. But and I thought, oh no, I've got to do it the hard way, I've got to do the 4-step buttonhole. But actually you've got total control over it. And I was sat there last night thinking, oh right, come on, buttonholes, here we go, this is going to be a bit tricky. it wasn't tricky. And I did a whole load of test ones. Brilliant. Great. And then I got myself all excited to finish this skirt I'm working on that needs buttons, and I realised I don't have the buttons, and I thought, well, I don't want to do the buttonholes before I've got the actual buttons, just in case the buttons I end up with are like a slightly different size. But I'm ready. I know. Oh, actually, that brings me on to one last sewing tool I will tell you about that I think is really good. Just a sec, let me get it. Ta-da! This is it. So I really did have all the gear and no idea when I sat down to learn to do buttonholes, because I was just so intimidated. I wanted to make sure I had everything I would need before I started. This is a buttonhole chisel, and it's basically got a really sharp point on the end there, and you just use it to like put in the middle of your buttonhole and give it a wiggle, and it cuts the middle of your buttonhole out for you, because I was a bit scared of doing, like, the tutorial I used I think recommended doing it using an unpicker or like a pair of scissors, and I thought, oh god, that's going to go wrong. And this I think is going to be really useful. So there we go, those are all my favourite sewing tools, the sewing tools that I now could not live without. I'd love to hear from you from the comments, as I said, on any tools that you recommend. And I would just like to stress that I did not have all of these tools when I first started sewing. If you're a beginner, I would not recommend necessarily for you to rush out and go and buy all this stuff, because you don't need it. When I first started sewing, I think I literally had, you know, some dressmaking scissors, some pins, some Tailors chalk, a tape measure, and that was about it. I added all these things into my collection over the last 3.5 years, and it all really depends on your personal preference as well, because some people just get on way better with certain tools than others. But yeah, this is the stuff 3.5 years in that I now would never be without for my sewing. So yeah, thank you ever so much for watching. Please do give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to my channel if you would like to see more of my videos, and I'll see you next time. Bye!